Do you remember what it felt like to be small? Not just in size, but in the way you looked at the world. The roads seemed endless. Every room felt enormous. Even simple problems felt impossible, until a familiar hand reached out to solve them. As children, we rarely question who our parents are. We don't wonder if they're scared, uncertain, or overwhelmed. To us, they are simply our parents. The people who know how to fix a broken toy, chase away a nightmare, or somehow find us in a crowded place without ever getting lost themselves. They seem bigger than life itself. Maybe that's why childhood feels so safe. Not because the world is safe, but because we believe someone else knows how to keep it that way. Think back to the last time you held your mother's hand while crossing a busy road, or when your father stood between you and something that frightened you. In those moments, they didn't just protect you from danger, they protected you from uncertainty. And when you're that young, certainty feels a lot like magic. If Project Human helps you see familiar parts of life in a completely new way, consider subscribing. There are countless moments we all experience without ever stopping to ask why. Together, we'll explore them one story at a time. The remarkable thing is that children don't choose to see their parents this way. Their minds are designed for it. Long before we learn mathematics or history, our brains are trying to answer one urgent question: am I safe? For a child, the answer depends almost entirely on the people raising them. Psychologists have long understood that children look to their caregivers as a secure base. From that sense of safety, they learn to explore, make friends, take risks, and slowly discover the world. Here's the strange part. Your parents didn't need to be perfect. They only needed you to believe they could keep you safe. That belief gave you the confidence to step into an uncertain world. Children don't imagine their parents know everything because they're naive. They imagine it because certainty feels safer than doubt. So their minds quietly fill in the gaps. We assume our parents know all the answers. We assume they can solve every problem. We assume tomorrow will somehow be okay, because they seem to believe it will be. It is one of childhood's most beautiful illusions, and one of its most necessary. Then, almost without warning, something changes. Not through one dramatic event, just a collection of ordinary moments that refuse to fit the picture you've always had. You wake up one night and hear voices from another room. They aren't laughing. They sound tense. You can't make out the words, only the feeling. Another evening, you notice your mother sitting alone after everyone has gone to bed. She quickly wipes away tears before anyone notices. Weeks later, your father sits silently in front of a pile of unopened bills. He doesn't realize you've walked into the room. For the first time, he looks tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that settles quietly inside a person. You don't fully understand what you're seeing. You only know something feels different. The people who once seemed unshakable suddenly look fragile. Children rarely stop and think, maybe my parents are struggling. Instead, they collect moments. A slammed door. A forced smile. A whispered phone call. A canceled family trip. The birthday gift that never came. Each one is stored away like a puzzle piece with no picture on the box. Years later, those pieces begin finding each other. Looking back as adults, many of us can point to one memory that quietly changed everything. Not because our parents suddenly became different people, but because we accidentally glimpsed a life we were never meant to carry. A life filled with worries they kept to themselves. Responsibilities we couldn't yet imagine. Decisions with no obvious right answer. For the first time, they looked less like superheroes, and more like people trying very hard not to let us see how heavy life sometimes felt. That realization rarely arrives with a loud announcement. It slips into your life almost unnoticed. Perhaps it's the day you hear your father quietly admit, "I don't know," Or the afternoon your mother asks someone else for help. Maybe it's the first time you discover that adults don't outgrow fear. They simply become better at hiding it. And once you've seen that, something inside you begins to change. Not because you've stopped loving your parents, but because you've started seeing the people behind the role. The people who existed long before they ever became mom or dad. It's easy to forget that your parents had an entire life before you arrived. Not because they tried to hide it, but because children rarely imagine their parents existing anywhere outside the role of mom or dad. It's almost impossible to picture the people who tucked you into bed as teenagers, worrying about exams, laughing uncontrollably with friends, falling in love for the first time, or lying awake at night wondering what their future would become. Yet that version of them was real. Long before they knew your name, they were making choices that would quietly shape the person who would one day raise you. Perhaps your mother dreamed of a different career. Perhaps your father imagined a completely different life. Some dreams came true. Others were quietly exchanged for responsibilities that arrived one after another, until the person they imagined becoming slowly gave way to the person their family needed them to be. Adulthood has a way of doing that. Not all at once, just one responsibility at a time. Until one day you look in the mirror and realize you've become someone your younger self never expected. Perhaps that's true of your parents too. The strange thing is that children almost never see those sacrifices while they're happening. They see the packed lunch, but not the meal their parents skipped. They see the birthday present, but not the overtime that paid for it. They remember the family holiday, but not the quiet anxiety over whether they could afford it. Love often disguises itself as ordinary routine, which is why we usually recognize it only after many years have passed. As adults, another realization begins to emerge. The habits our parents carried didn't appear out of nowhere. The father who struggled to express affection may have grown up believing that emotions should stay hidden. The mother who worried constantly may have spent years living with uncertainty herself. The parent who celebrated every small success may have once longed to hear those same words from someone else. None of this excuses the harm a parent may have caused. But it does remind us that no one begins parenthood as a blank page. Every parent arrives with a story already in progress. Psychologists sometimes describe this through the idea of generational patterns. We inherit far more than our appearance. We inherit ways of handling disappointment, ways of expressing love, ways of apologizing, ways of staying silent, sometimes even fears that were never spoken aloud. Most of this isn't taught intentionally. Children are always watching. Long before they understand language, they understand patterns. A parent can spend years saying, "Always stay calm." But if every disagreement ends in shouting, the shouting becomes the lesson. The opposite is true as well. A child who grows up surrounded by patience, forgiveness, and kindness often carries those habits into adulthood without ever realizing where they began. Every family has an emotional language. Some speak it gently, others speak it through silence. Then life offers something unexpected. A mirror. You hear yourself comforting someone with the exact words your mother once used. You laugh exactly like your father. Or perhaps you're in the middle of an argument, and a sentence leaves your mouth that sounds so much like one of your parents that it startles you. For a brief second, it's as though time folds in on itself. Those moments can feel unsettling. Not because we're destined to become our parents, but because we finally understand how deeply they have shaped us. Whether we spend our lives embracing their example or trying to escape it, our parents leave fingerprints on the people we become. Some of those fingerprints feel like gifts. Others feel like scars. Some people inherit confidence. Others inherit criticism. Some inherit emotional safety. Others inherit wounds they never asked to carry. Understanding where those wounds came from doesn't erase them. A painful childhood is still painful. A broken promise still leaves its mark. Seeing your parents as human should never require pretending that your pain wasn't real. Understanding is not the opposite of accountability. The two can exist together. You can hold someone responsible for the hurt they caused, while still recognizing that they were carrying burdens of their own. Perhaps burdens they never learned how to put down. And perhaps that's one of adulthood's hardest lessons. The people who taught us how to live were still trying to figure life out themselves. Not from a place of certainty, but from experience, from mistakes, from hope, from fear, and from love, however imperfectly they knew how to express it. So perhaps the question is no longer, were my parents perfect? Perhaps the better question is, what changes inside me when I stop expecting them to have been? For many people, the moment arrives without warning, not during a family celebration, not after a life-changing conversation, not even after a great loss. It happens on an ordinary day. Perhaps your father asks you to help him carry something he would have lifted alone years ago. Perhaps your mother pauses before making a decision and says, "What do you think?" The words are simple. The moment is small. But something inside you shifts forever. Without anyone saying it aloud, the relationship has changed. The people who once held your hand are now reaching for yours. And that may be one of adulthood's quietest milestones. Not moving out. Not getting married. Not building a career. But realizing that the people who once guided every step of your life are now walking beside you. For the first time, you understand something that was impossible to understand as a child. There was never a moment when your parents suddenly became adults. They were simply growing older, learning through experience, making decisions they had never made before, trying to raise a child they had never raised before. The certainty you saw wasn't always certainty. Sometimes, it was courage wearing the mask of confidence. And perhaps that's what love often looks like. Not always knowing the right answer, but refusing to let your fear become someone else's. Some parents did this beautifully. Others struggled. Some carried wounds they never healed. Others passed those wounds on. That doesn't make every choice acceptable. And it doesn't erase the pain some children experienced. Understanding someone's story should never require rewriting your own. Sometimes healing leads to forgiveness. Sometimes it leads to stronger boundaries. Sometimes it simply leads to peace with the truth. All of those journeys are valid. Seeing your parents as human doesn't tell you what your relationship with them should become. It simply changes the way you understand the people standing on the other side of it. Then, one day, life quietly places you in their position. You become responsible for someone else's happiness, someone else's safety, someone else's future, or perhaps you simply become responsible for your own. And suddenly, the questions become familiar. Am I making the right decision? Am I giving enough? Will this mistake matter years from now? For the first time, the questions belong to you. And that's when many people experience the realization they never expected. Think about how old you are today. Now imagine someone placing your childhood into your hands. Your fears, your dreams, your mistakes, your stubbornness, your endless questions. Would you know exactly what to do? Probably not. Neither did they. That doesn't mean every decision they made was right. It means they were doing something every human being must eventually do, living a life they had never lived before. Maybe that's why perspective changes us. Not because the past changes, but because we finally understand how difficult it is to be responsible for another human being while still trying to understand yourself. Growing up isn't reaching the age your parents once were. It's arriving at the understanding they once needed. The understanding that every generation passes down both gifts and wounds. And every generation has a choice: to repeat them or to transform them. Perhaps that is the quiet responsibility of adulthood, to carry forward the love, to learn from the mistakes, and to leave those who come after us with something lighter than what we received. Maybe that is what maturity really looks like. Not seeing our parents as heroes, not seeing them as villains, but seeing them as people. People who laughed before they worried, who dreamed before they sacrificed, who failed more often than they admitted, who loved more deeply than they sometimes knew how to express. People just like us. Perhaps the day you realize your parents are human isn't the day they become smaller. It's the day your understanding becomes bigger. And maybe that's one of the greatest gifts adulthood has to offer. Thank you for spending these moments with Project Human. If this story helped you see someone in a different light, consider sharing it with a person who might need that same perspective. Because sometimes, a single conversation begins with a single realization. And perhaps the greatest surprise of growing up is discovering that the people who raised you were never standing at the finish line. They were finding the way, one uncertain step at a time.